When I was 14, I was going through what my parents called teen angst. I would get aggressive over the smallest provocations. I got suspended from school for fighting. I started becoming mean and intolerable to be around. But I would be so nice and apologetic the next week or so, and the cycle would repeat itself. Hostility, mood swings, agitation, insomnia, etc. Unbeknownst to them, or myself at the time, I was suffering from bipolar disorder syndrome. Around my manic episodes, I would do really stupid things. I would put myself into potentially fatal situations. Most of my friends stopped dealing with me, so I looked for new friends in the wrong places. I ended up coping with my episodes using illegal substances and alcohol. It was August and school was starting back soon. I was having a really bad manic episode. I thought I was invincible, and everyone around me was jealous because they weren't having as much fun as me. I thought I was smarter than everybody. My parents took me to a psychiatrist, but I never spoke a word to her. I never even looked at her. I was in denial that something was very wrong with me. Around this time, my sense of danger and fear was very low. This particular manic episode was lengthy and lasted about 3 weeks. 1 week into the episode, I came up with the perfect idea that I should run away from home. I would survive by selling weed, and would become the greatest cannabis saleswoman that lived. I packed a few things, stole $327 from my dad's wallet, copped a huge amount of weed, and went to a seedier part of town. I checked into my motel room. I went 3 days on the run and had only sold about 2 bags of weed. I smoked until there was no more to sell. I had also spent a majority of my money on booze and new dress, and had to think of a way to make some more cash. I didn't want to go back home to my jealous family. I was coming back from a restaurant when a middle-aged dude in a blue car pulled up beside the curb. He rolled down the window and offered me $100 for sex with him. I agreed. I thought I was so smart and so convincing that he would just put the money in my hand and I would run off with it. Bipolar sucks. So we go to a motel not far from the one I was hiding out at. I had it planned out perfectly. I would run out with the money in my hand. I believed that I was strong enough to fight a 5'11" man who had a lot of muscle. I believed that I wasn't in any danger. We go in the room, and I asked him for the money. Dude ignores me and started kissing me and trying to take off my clothes. My sane females would have been frightened out, but I wasn't exactly sane, so I wasn't worried about rape or injury. I forcibly pulled away from him, and he slapped the shit out of me. He slapped me so hard that I had a brief moment of clarity and ran to the bathroom and locked the door. I opened the window and just jumped out. My adrenaline and shock eventually wore off, and I actually laughed at the whole thing. Luckily, a police officer recognized me as a missing person and took me home to my parents before I could do anything else dangerously stupid. Thinking back on the situation, I don't find anything about my actions humorous. My stomach churns a little bit thinking about how he could have raped or even murdered me. I am now taking medication for my illness. So back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now-closed pub in my hometown. Not a job I particularly liked, but it paid the bills. At the time, they had hired a new kitchen manager that we will all simply know as Carney. Carney was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but always stayed late to help the barman do our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Carney had yet to find the place of permanent residence and had recently lost my tenants, so someone suggested he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants I usually took in, but having had a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a nice steady job may be a shift in the right direction, so I agreed. Carney wasted no time and followed me home that very same night, only he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, the boyfriend of Carney. Honestly, I hadn't even realized he was gay up until that point, but was water off of my back regardless. Looking back now, what really should have bothered me though was Lawrence's appearance. He looked like he had been sleeping on the street, as I would later find out. So Carney moved in, Lawrence was there a lot too, and it was easy to know when due to his mobile ringtone sounding like the quacking of a duckling. Carney had some habits that were rather noteworthy to this story. In particular, he basically never closed his bathroom door, no matter what he was doing in there. It was always open, and although he was a very heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside the house, so Carney had been living there for about 2 weeks when I had come down with an awful case of pink eye. This being highly contagious, I was given leave of absence from my bartending job and therefore decided to go wait it out at my sister's for a few days. Apparently, I didn't mind giving it to her. So the day that my sister was scheduled to come pick me up, I took a casual stroll into the bar that myself and Ben, my good friend from high school and at the time co-worker, had been building in my house, and something caught my eye. All our liquor bottles were completely empty. Now, those who had been frequenting my house at the time would know that we weren't just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy here, but bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, schnapps, liquors. Basically, it was a fully stocked bar that could host a pretty big party without requiring much in the way of additions. So I called Carney in, asking him what he knew about this, receiving feedback that Lawrence and he had been on a slight drinking binge that had left me both furious about the $1,000 worth of stock that had been drunk out, but also slightly impressed that he was actually still alive. Regardless, I said that I will be dealing with this upon my return. So I'm with my sister for a few days, and on Friday I get a call from my local police department asking me if I knew a Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I did not. They finally add that I will probably know him, as Carney and I should probably come down to the station, as they had just arrested his boyfriend trying to sell my camera equipment. So my sister rushes me back to home, where all the camera equipment was on display at the police station. It's on this visit that I am informed that Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL who got dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime, and now had a rap sheet the length of the Bible. The kicker was that both he and Carney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. So Lawrence is in jail and my sister drops me off at home, more or less the same time that Carney gets home as well. Based on Carney's account of what had happened, he had turned Lawrence in himself, as he couldn't allow Lawrence to do to me what he was trying to do. Although I had appreciated his sacrifice, I still told Carney that he would have to go, having been the overall cause of all of this. However, not wanting to leave the homeless man homeless, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. So Monday comes, and having just completed staff meetings, I walk home to encounter a very much freed Lawrence sitting on the sidewalk across my house watching it. I confront Lawrence as to why he's there, and he tries to apologize before begging for money. Rather out of character, really. I dismissed him without giving him a cent. Now I go back to the previous night. So I had mentioned the staff meeting for a reason, as it was at that meeting where we had gotten a rather sizable list of liquor bottles that had gone missing from the storeroom, leaving all of us suspecting each other. I, however, would not have to wait long to figure out who the real culprit was, as a few days later I opened the garbage bin in my kitchen to see the missing bottles, all empty and staring back at me. I decided to sit on this information for the time being, although I did photograph it just for in case I need it as evidence later. I had also called over Ben to inform him of the developments. As this quickly was becoming a detective game, we decided to enter Carney's room for search for further evidence. Nothing of vast significance in there, with one exception: 2 single photographs of Lawrence before he had turned into the homeless version of Lex Luthor, or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still there, but as Lawrence had spent a lot of time there before the incident, I accepted this as normal. Now, I should also add that I had mentioned Lawrence's release to Kearney, and had told him that if I ever suspected that they were still seeing each other, I would throw him out of the house myself. Only a few days would pass before this came into play. On this particular night, I had been bartending again, and Kearney had constantly been stopping by the bar to help myself to draught glasses half full of wine and half Coke, which he would drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he correctly pointed out, he was still a manager, and we had no right to tell him what he could or could not do. On his fourth trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside, where I confronted Lawrence sitting outside, sharing the half Coke, half wine concoction with Kearney. This pissed me off, so the next day I returned to the restaurant with my photographic evidence that I had handed over to the general manager, who was also kind of a friend of mine. Although I hadn't physically seen it, I had heard the confrontation through the office door when he had fired Kearney. Kearney left, obviously upset, and apparently had no idea that I had been the one who had turned him in. So we had closed early that night, and I was walking home, going past the high school. I saw Kearney coming out of the opposite direction. He walked past me, literally only saying 2 words, "I'm scared," before disappearing into the darkness. That would be the last time I would ever physically lay my eyes on Conrad Schultz. So we reached the final week before Kearney's eviction was to take place. Ben had come to stay with me for that duration, as we both wanted to monitor the situation and make sure that nothing else happens. It was in this week that Kearney's behavior suddenly changed. He was constantly smoking in his room, and his door was closed 24/7. In fact, neither Ben nor I had caught so much as a peek of him in that entire last week, which we hadn't thought much of at the time. So the day of Kearney's eviction comes around. Ben had gone home for a few hours, and I finally hear Kearney's bedroom door open. Someone walks out of the room, opens the front door, and leaves. I follow him outside, but somehow he had already completely disappeared. What was left, though, was his house keys, indicating that he obviously wasn't planning to come back. I took a look at the keys, noticing something strange. Although the correct keys were all on the keychain, there were several keys that weren't mine. Why would he leave the wrong keys? I remember myself thinking as I walked into his room. His room was a shock, not because of the state that it was in, but more that he had literally left almost all of his belongings behind, with one exception, you guessed it, the 2 photos of Lawrence. Upon further investigation, I suddenly realized that all traces of Lawrence ever being there had completely vanished, with all of Kearney's stuff left behind. During the next few days, Ben and I went on a mission searching the town, crawling into drain pipes, trying to find any trace of Kearney's whereabouts, but they all added up to nothing. Conrad Schultz had simply vanished off of the face of the earth. That wasn't the case with Lawrence, though. No, he was still around. Having made some new homeless friends, we encountered him several times begging on the streets. I asked him every time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just acted like he had never heard of him. The last time I would see Lawrence was across from work, attempting to break into a car. I had called the police on him, and they arrived very quickly, arresting him on the spot while he was being laid away by the police. I shouted after him one last time, "Where is Kearney, Lawrence?" But just as he ignored me and let the cops drag him away the next day, I filed a police report reporting Kearney as a missing person and suggesting that Lawrence maybe knows something about it, but nothing ever came of it. So Lawrence, I don't know what you did, or if you did something to Kearney or not, but if you did, let's not meet again. I grew up in a small town, low crime, typical life. I've had the same friends for years. We all went to the same school our whole lives. I've been graduated from high school for 5 years now, and I keep in touch with several friends from then, but not many. 2 years ago, my friend Tracy contacts me through text, says that there is something creepy she has to tell me. I don't think much of this. She's always been that odd, quirky friend. She didn't fit in with high school, but I think it's because she was more mature and put together than people our age. Anyways, I invite her over to my house, which is a 10-minute walk from hers. She says she'll be right over. A few minutes later, she shows up. I will never forget the look on her face, pale, cold, wide-eyed. I tell her to sit down and come on in and talk. She says that her dad received a letter in the mail. Her dad is a custodian at our high school. Really sweet, quiet guy. I ask her what is the problem, not realizing what I was getting ourselves into. She says her dad received a letter in the mail with no return address. His name was typed, and the letter was typed as well. She said the letter said that 2 men were sodomized, cut up, and buried in the septic system behind the barber shop. She said that it had the names of the victims on it as well as the murderers. There were 3 of them. She didn't have the letter with her. She said she would send me a picture of it tonight. I ask her if her dad has reported it to the police. She says not yet. We need to go to the barber shop. It's only a 10-minute walk from my house, so whatever. And honestly, we were just trying to freak ourselves out, have a little fun. Maybe that's weird, but whatever. We walk there, iPhones in hand, ready to take some pictures. We go to the shop. It's obviously closed as it's around 10 at night. We had to walk on the lawn to get close to the window, our faces pressed against the glass to see in. We took some pictures of the window, tried looking in, but there's blinds in the windows. He has some weird knickknacks in the window. The sign is super old, but nothing out of the blue. Then my stomach sank. Even to this day, I get shivers up my spine. Paul was sitting in the back of the shop directly staring at us. He was sitting slunched over in the chair, his arms dangling off the side of his feet crookedly below him. His face was scruffy with a beard, his eyes as cold as the night. He was staring directly at us. The disturbing part was that he was sitting in the complete dark, the only light from the faintly seen room in the back corner. The other disturbing part was that it's around 10:30 on a weekend night and he's sitting in his shop by himself in the dark. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just sat there staring at me. I mean, it's his shop. We were trespassing. He had every right to be staring at me, but the way he was just staring so deeply in me, it felt like an eternity. I knew that there was no way that he knew that we had read this letter, but I think he knew. We got the heck out of there. I'm obviously freaked out by this and decide to Google the victims' names. Sure enough, they show up on Canada's missing website, a cold case. I'm freaking out, but decide to send the information to Tracy. Tracy calls me and tells me that her dad took the letter to the police. A few weeks later, the police inform her dad that they had received the same letter from multiple people in our town. They used the stamp to trace back where it had sent from. Toronto, apparently. It was written by the daughter of the barber, who was mentally ill. They refused to look into the case. At the time, I worked at the grocery store in our town. I saw Paul all the time, and every time, he had just given me this silly smile. I walked up to him while he was in the produce section. "Paul," I stammered, "hey, just wanted to apologize for looking in your window. It was wrong of me to do that." Paul continued inspecting the cabbage, acting as if he couldn't hear me. "It won't happen again," I said. As I began to walk away, "I hope it does." I turn around and look at him. He stands there and gives me that silly smile. I told some of my coworkers about what had happened, and a coworker of mine told me how one time they had had a garage sale, and Paul was bragging to my mom how he returned his own dog with gardener shears. So, end of story, nothing happened. It still totally freaks us out to this day, but I no longer live near that town, so there's that. Alright, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for watching.